Hello folks, my name is Mark and this is Why I Hate the World. How you guys doing? So this is a video about Comicgate, and for those of you who don't know what Comicgate is, what it refers to, Comicgate is to comics essentially the same thing as Gamergate is to video games, except Comicgate is a lot less popular. You know, the movement is a lot smaller. In fact, I wouldn't even call it a movement. But, you know, it's something people are talking about. And what it essentially is, it's a backlash from self-identified comic book fans against the perceived censorship efforts of feminists and liberals and the dreaded social justice warriors. And personally, I think it's all a bunch of shit. So, before we start, I think I should go over my comic book fandom credentials a little bit, you know, establish my street cred. So I've been collecting for over 20 years. I have something in the area of about 2,500 to 3,000 comics currently in my possession. I have a lot more, you know, as far as like graphic novels and things, you know, I've been using things like Comixology and Indie Comics Publisher and stuff to like read things on a tablet, so so anyway, I've been reading a lot, you know. I've been reading since I was a kid, basically. I read mostly Marvel, but my fiance has kind of got me into DC a little more recently. Although Marvel is my first love, so whatever. So, you know, but I also enjoy reading a lot from smaller companies and independent publishers and things, so, you know, I'm into this stuff, right? So, a little background here. First off, for years and years and years, comic books have been marketed almost exclusively to males. Pretty much, you know, ever since comics came around back in the early 20th century, you know, and hit the big time in the 30s with Superman and all that, it's almost always been a male pastime. And very few exceptions managed to break that over the years. I mean, there have been some, you know, things like Archie and romance comics and shit like that, but for the most part, it's been seen as something that boys were into, right? But the truth is that a portion of the comic readers have always been female, even going all the way back to the day, you know. But there's been very, very few efforts, very few efforts in recent decades, at least, in order to cultivate that audience, you know, because they've always been a minority, right? And, you know, a minority in the audience, at least. So nowadays, however, thanks to the internet and also thanks to multi-million-dollar movie adaptions of, you know, famous comic books, things like Marvel movies and, you know, The Dark Knight and the Avengers and things like that, the audience for comics has expanded immensely. And along with that comes hundreds of thousands of new female readers, right? So for the first time in a long time, you know, women are getting into comic books. You know, they go to the movies, they see freaking Iron Man or whatever, you know, they go, or Thor, they go, Thor's cute, and then they go and they want to read, you know, they want to read about it, right? So, two things are happening here now. Get some water first. So two things are happening now. First off, Marvel and DC, they want this female audience. Okay, they want it. So they're starting to write stories and publish content with, you know, women in mind, you know. A good example of this is female Thor, which caused a kind of a bit of a controversy because people are like, you know, Thor's a girl and doesn't fit in with the comic and blah, 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 blah. That's a whole nother video, but, you know, but the second thing that's happening is that women are starting to notice that comics, which are marketed primarily towards men, they don't always cast women in the most flattering light, you know. And a lot of very somewhat sexist tropes are used in comics, you know. Women are always statuesque, you know, supermodel types with incredibly large tits. Okay, in fact, there's a running joke, you know, what's the most common superpower, you know, women being able to keep their huge, you know, bazongas up, and right. So But some of this, it's some of the very blatant sexualization of women in superhero comics is starting to get critiqued a little bit in feminist media circles. People like Anita Sarkeesian and stuff are starting to take notice of this, and they're starting to make videos and do blog posts where they critique this kind of thing. One thing that comes to mind is the Spider-Man cover by Milo Manara or something. Whatever. I did a video on this a little while ago. It was about they got this European artist who does a lot of like softcore kind of sexy artwork, right? Sexy comics in Italy and everything, and he drew a issue of Spider-Woman, the first issue of Spider-Woman, and it has her with her butt up in the air, and Maddox has a funny video about that. But stuff like that, So, but the reaction against these two trends from the original all-male comic book base of fans, you could call that Comicgate, It seems like there are two types of people who are causing all the ruckus. The first type are the usual dumb shit, pseudo-right-wing, anti-feminist, anti-social justice worker types. Basically the same dipshits as the Gamergate people. There's a lot of crossover with this group with other right-wing social conservative types, red pillars, conspiracy theorists, libertarians, things like that, These are the social, these people, they're social conservatives essentially, and they kind of have their tits in a twist because this is just another front in the culture war to them. The second type seem to be made up of male comic book fans who feel threatened by what they see as an incursion into their favorite hobby. And as I mentioned before, comic collection, collecting comic books and things, it's always been traditionally a very male-dominated pastime. And so these men, they see all these women online, reading comics for the first time and talking crap about it and criticizing their hobby, and a lot of them take offense to it, So basically these are the same kind of guys who are like, get pissed at geek girls and stuff, right? And they feel like they put a lot of time and effort into the hobby, and they don't like it when they see newcomers, or who they perceive as newcomers coming up and like taking a shit all over everything. So I said before that personally I think it's a blow to shit. I think the whole thing's fucking stupid. And you may be saying to yourself, but why do you say that, Mark? And I will say to you, thank you for asking. I'll tell you why. And I see the fact that the comic industry is under this kind of scrutiny in regards to how it represents women and minorities in its stories to be a good thing. I think it's positive, I think it's a sign that the industry is maturing. And it says to me that the comics industry is undergoing changes, and I think those changes will eventually be for the better. Because the feminists and the social justice warriors and all those people, we make fun of them and everything, but in a sense that, they have a point, all right? Maybe female characters should be more than just supermodels and spandex, For example, a character that comes to mind is Starfire from Teen Titans, in the 80s. If you look at her original costume, it's just basically a fucking, bikini, right? I mean, she basically just wears a bikini with a fucking, with all her tits hanging out and everything, and and if they're not these sort of statuesque supermodel badass bitch type stereotypes, then they're usually just damsels in distress, Another example, since we're sticking with DC, another example is fucking Green Lantern's girlfriend getting stuffed into a fridge. I mean, that's a real famous one right there. And, the thing is that there are exceptions to these. I mean, these are tropes, right? But, there are exceptions from both companies that come to mind. Somebody like Amanda Walker from DC, or Miss Marvel from, Marvel Comics. Those are good. Those are what I think are good examples of strong female characters that don't fit into those stereotypes, right? But, we could just use more of those. I mean, how many... for every Amanda Walker, it seems like there's just a dozen Starfires or Alex DeWitts. That was Green Lantern's girlfriend, Alex DeWitt. I mean, like what I said before in my videos on this subject, because I've made a few, is that, it doesn't really matter to me personally. You know, I don't really get upset at sexism in comics, right? And video games and all that. It doesn't bother me. I mean, the way I see it, if you don't like it, then don't buy it, right? And I encourage people to go out and make their own content, you know. Draw your own comics. I'm actually an aspiring comic writer and artist too. I self-publish and I sell at conventions and things like that. And, you know, I think everybody should do it, you know. But at the same time, I also think everyone has the right to express their opinions about these things. And it seems to me that as far as Comicgate goes, it's the anti-feminist and the anti-social justice people. Those are the ones who are trying to stifle dissent, right? Those are the people who are screaming and crying and trying to get the feminists to shut up about it. It's like, no, you shouldn't. You don't get to tell them to shut up. They get to say what they want to say, you know. I mean, for example, you know, a good example is the Batgirl cover where the Joker's, you know, got her right then, and DC pulled the cover, right? And the reason they pulled the cover was not because feminists got mad and threatened to boycott the fucking cover. They pulled it because the anti-feminists and the anti-social justice people, the fucking Comicgate people, started slinging death threats, right? And that's why they pulled it. Okay, I mean you're being fucking, if your intention is to stop censorship, in that case, that is a good example of how you don't do it. Okay, so to sum it up, I think comics are large enough. Cat, shut up! Sorry, that's my cat. Right. I think comics are large enough that the industry is big enough that everybody, you know, can be included. And I think that they can cater to the Comicgate people, and they can cater to the feminists, and they can cater to everybody. And I think that eventually it'll grow, and maybe it'll move away from superhero stuff. You know, we'll have superheroes, and then maybe there'll be other genres, you know, horror, science fiction, mystery, right? Kind of like how it is in Japan. You know, in Japan, in Manga, you have hundreds of little creators and companies that and there's all kinds of different genres, you know. It's not just Dragon Ball Z and shit. I mean, they have sports genres, for crying out loud. They have all kinds of stuff, and there's a ton of, you know, it's very diverse, and I would love to see that happen in America, and I think that this is a good step towards that. So, I don't know, in short, the industry has nothing to lose and everything to gain from embracing diversity in its storytelling. And the people who are standing in the way of that, I think, are just butthurt, you know, because they don't like playing with girls. That's fucking stupid. So, anyway, that's it. Adios, folks.